We've asked panel members really to represent a range of the issues that Michael has brought up in terms of basically in terms of the study, but both in terms of the sort of countermeasures or interventions that he spoke about, but also the findings. Just to start off with, and I might just start with Michael, because you've spent a huge amount of time having done all this work and seen what's emerged from the study. What, if you can get it down to a sort of 1 minute answer, what surprised you most? So you only get 1 minute now for 7.5 years work or whatever it was. What surprised you most coming out of this?
Probably the fact that the impact speeds, I've done a lot of work in that sort of biomechanics injury space prior to this. And I think one of the things that surprised me more than anything was just the fact that the vehicle regulations are probably not quite in balance as they should be, and the impact speeds are well beyond the capability of vehicles, which then to protect occupants, so even for people who are doing all the right things, and irrespective of what the road otherwise looks like, the fact that they are still at such significant risk, and what it also then means is not just for that person, but it cascades, that exponential risk cascades into what AV, ambulance, have to do and how they have to manage the severely injured person from extrication, what the Alfred needs to do or the Melbourne, and how the person can respond. So that very simple, seemingly simple thing alarmed me more than anything, that even, because you think that, most crashes, most people wipe off speed. They just don't wipe off enough for the vehicle to help. Yeah. That's the key.
Okay. Thank you. I might move on to Soames, if that's okay. Soames, I suppose you get to see what's happening around the world, the interventions that people are applying. From your perspective, and probably from an international perspective, what stands out most to you from the study? You get 2 minutes because you haven't had any time.
Thanks. I suppose internationally, what stands out to me in a massive amount of incredibly valuable data and analysis here is speed. And I think when I look at what Victoria is doing versus so many other countries that I work in, Victoria is a leader, TAC is a leader, MUAC's a leader, and a lot of countries look to what's done here as opportunity. So I think that this kind of work and the move to safe system is a huge opportunity being led well from Victoria, but we can do more. What jumps out to me about speed is it is the fundamental factor, and I think what Michael's just said partly covers it, but we simply don't have systems which allow the speeds which our speed limits allow, even if you don't have speeding. So to me, the key opportunities are about lowering speed limits as well as removing speeding. And I think Victoria has done an incredibly good job of managing speeding. But when you've still got these percentages of people speeding and involved in horrible crashes, it screams that we need to do even more. So I think Victoria can go even harder on this incredibly important winning space that's been created in the state and is being emulated in quite a few other places. I think that the speeding is also massively underestimated, and as Renee pointed out to me, the way it's expressed in the Victorian strategy says speeding is involved in at least 30% of fatalities, and I think that at least hides a great deal. And that's not a critique of the data system or of police. I think what police face when they go out to, single vehicle fatal crashes or single pedestrian fatal crashes and working out what's involved is horrendous. But if we look at those kinds of crashes, then You know, you go out, there's a driver and there's a dead pedestrian who can't tell a story. Is the driver going to fess up and say, oh yeah, I was speeding, sorry? We know they're not. So speeding's incredibly hard to identify. Now that 30% is probably a very substantial underestimate even for Victoria. And I'm relieved to see you nodding your head there. And if we look at correction factors available elsewhere, for example, studies in South Australia with black boxes and things, we find that those police estimates or police assessments of where speeding is involved are missing about 50% of cases. So if we apply that in Victoria, then speeding might be 60% of the deaths in Victoria. That makes it a profoundly important, the single most important factor to try and manage. The other thing that really jumps out to me about the data in the study is, and now this will take a little bit of explaining, so I'm glad you've given me an extra minute. Thank you, Sam. So if you're 10k above the speed limit, your chances of one of these horrible crashes goes up 44%. If you're 10k below it, it goes down 30%. But actually, those are mirror images. So, you know, if you imagine that at the speed limit's 100 crashes, go up to 144, you've gone up 44 crashes. The other one's only down 30, but if you then say, okay, we're now at 70, what is 30 as a percentage of 70? It's 43. So going 10 below the speed limit is a 43%, the same as a 44% above. That screams to me that going below the speed limit, getting people down 10k, is going to give us a huge benefit, like getting rid of those people who are speeding by 10k or more. So to me, they're the two things. Lower the speed limits, manage the speeding more vigorously than even Victoria is doing now.
Thanks, Soames. And you're right, that did take a little bit of explaining and I think a little bit of cognitive skill for us all. Thank you for that. If we move on to Marcelo, I'm just thinking more broadly about transport. And so is there anything that surprised you more, I suppose, more broadly about the transport system? Or really, anything you want to talk about, but I suppose you've just got that very broad mantle.
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting to hear speed as one of the key things that we're focusing on today. For us, we think about it in the movement and place concept, in the placemaking, and for us, the challenge is how do we embed the safe system within our movement and place, with our policies, with the frameworks that we follow in decision making for roads, for not only design but also change. We need community drivers in this space, and I think when we think about the conception of public in regards to movement, is usually how do I get from place A to B in the quickest way. And I actually was talking to my boss, to the Deputy Secretary of Network of Policy Precincts Innovation, and she put it in a really good context, which was around what does time matter for people or in different settings. If you're a rest car driver, a millisecond might make a difference. If you are, I don't know, caking a bake, a minute here, a minute there, might just burn it, you know? Or your steak might be moving from medium rare to rare. But if you're actually getting from place A to B, the key point will be to get there safely and then actually to worry about, you know, the routes. And for us, it's actually how do we make people have informed decision-making about movement in regards to their travel patterns. We also now have challenges, or not challenges, we have targets that align not only to the road safety strategy about reducing fatalities and serious injury, but actually moving people to active modes of transport, to change their mode into public transport as well. And that's obviously in the metropolitan settings. And I heard Michael talk also about the settings, perhaps in regional areas where we will be challenged by public transport not necessarily being available for all, but how do we create sort of those mobility options that enable people to move safer, especially those that perhaps are more vulnerable. So it is quite a big, complex problem, Sam, and all. But then I go, for us, the key will be how do we actually start effecting a change in the system by enabling, again, frameworks like movement and place to really capture the essence of speed settings. Then I know my team would be kind of disappointed if I didn't talk about ADRs, because I know we talked about vehicle technology. And yes, I do agree with you. We need to actually get the Commonwealth to take that active role. We're working with them in that space, and it's how do we influence that sort of the ANCAP leading role in regards to those sort of settings into further work and in the policy setting of vehicles.
Thank you. Just as a quick comment, I think one of the issues with the success Victoria has had is we've educated the community very well, so they believe they understand road trauma and what they believe the causes are, which of course are the drink driving, the speeding, etc. And so really that discussion you've just had, Marcelo, about reframing how we talk to the community about safety, I think is really going to be the key to us starting to really address speed, because I mean, we understand that we need to look at speed limits and continue with the enforcement of those limits or manage the speed, but without community support, it's going to be or continue to be difficult. So thank you for that. Libby, your first responders, basically, first on the scene, you see the trauma. From your perspective, what stood out?
Yeah, I've sat here today and obviously have a bit of history in this space, but one of the interesting things out of the study for me aligns with what Ambulance Victoria is here for, and that's about timely care and best care and the opportunities that exist in that space. As a matter of fact, I was sitting there with Sam and I just texted my emergency management director and said, can you get a high-speed crash put into our virtual paramedic for the paramedics to actually understand and as a real-time incident so that we get that. The other thing that probably draws my attention a bit is probably the dichotomy between rural roads where less ambulances are, and the challenge that then creates for, and it's not just the fatalities because it's the serious injury collisions that have that intersectionality with the whole of system and health across. And one of the things that does come to mind for me is that, Michael, you've talked about, the health, and I was actually quite shocked to see the 18% for mental health and the data that supports that. And I just wonder our first responders, whether it's an ambulance, police, fireys, SES, those people who are in our communities who are responding, who actually from attending these incidents end up with post-traumatic stress disorder or other health issues and, fatigue and those sorts of things that contribute. So it's almost like a vicious circle. So I think there's some opportunity for us there. The other thing that I think I would like to do is our paramedics and our, we have what's called transport services. So we outsource to Royal Flying Doctors and St John's, and we have medium acuity transport and those sorts of things. But if we educated that part of the workforce to actually be at the eyes and ears on the roads of Victoria to understand where road design opportunities exist, then I think that we can achieve some pretty good outcomes. So I'll be talking to you, Michael.
And thank you. First action from the ECIS study has already happened, so thank you for that. Worth all of that time, Michael. We've already got one action. Yeah. So you. All right.
Can I just quickly follow up a couple of things. One, we need to understand when we talk about speed limits, much of our serious trauma happens on rural roads, local and C-class roads. And that's really important for ownership, but also you don't spend a lot of time on some of the roads before you get to a C or a B. So it's about having that conversation about what time means. If I'm going from Matoa to Horsham and down to Victoria, I'm only on the poor quality, poor quality road out the back for maybe 5K. So my time cost is poor. Is small, I'm sorry. The other thing, and that's something to bear in mind about having conversations with the community, because it's the community members in rural communities are the ones that are dying. So there's a freight task and a need to have higher speeds operated at, and then there's a safety component to get people to the safe road that's faster. The other, and we see that in our crashes. The other thing I would say, the trauma costs to emergency services of attending these crashes is immense. One of our staff actually works at PTRS, and at the Austin, and we see, and I have seen very clear examples of repeated exposure to these crashes as being a significant health burden for emergency care workers. So anything that can be done to reduce the impact of these and the time spent at scene is really critical. And we cannot, of course, forget safety by design. We can't forget the road. It's not just about the speed. It's actually about how we design and how we implement. And that's what we need to take out of this data. It's not just a speed limit issue. It's how we do other things to create a road environment that supports, sustains, encourages or forces drivers into a state of normal driving. That's super important, and we can't forget that.
Thanks, Michael. Glenn, I think from your perspective, you've really got both ends of this integrated safety chain. Obviously, in terms of behaviours, helping, I suppose, enforce and educate in relation to making sure people behave on the road as best they can, and also attend crash scenes. Your takeouts?
So I found the data and the content's really interesting, but probably no great surprises, but a lot of reaffirmation of what we know. We still see speed as the predominant cause of serious injury and fatal collisions, and we task that accordingly. Something that did jump out, and it's something we've seen this year, is the non-compliance with seatbelt wearing, which is really quite surprising. And there's been some discussion about the maturity of our fleet and the need to mature our fleet because I don't know, everyone's car here, everyone that yells at you if you haven't got your seatbelt on. So people are deliberately taking action to clip the belt behind them or whatever. So that's a human behaviour. Why are they doing that? So that's really quite concerning. We've seen 237 lives lost this year so far and 235 crashes, which is interesting because we have seen a reduction in double, triple, higher level fatalities, but a large number of those, 22 weren't wearing seatbelts. So in this day and age, with all we've been done, why is that? So it just seems that that's a behavioural thing, and that played out on the table before, I think, in one of the reports. Which when I read that, I went, yeah, well, that's exactly what our intel is showing us. So speed significantly overrepresented. Why? And we've seen it post-COVID. The spike at the end of last year, at the start of November, when restrictions in Victoria were released, and we saw, in the last 7 days of December last year, we had 11 lives lost. Remarkable. Because it was almost like that last lockdown and that freedom, people's reaction and driving behaviours was disproportionately risky compared to what they should have been doing. And to Michael's point around, they got to the point where their behaviour or their driving didn't matter, and the car took over. And the behaviour that they're exhibiting meant that that is a remarkably high level in a 7-day period to lose lives, 25 for the month of December, which was way too high. And it's just that behavioural piece, and predominantly related to risk behaviour around AOD and speed. So, and then when you look at the data, and Michael's last bit there talking about, the drug driving and seeing some of the presentations at ICATS in Rotterdam in August, the Canadian experience, and some of the narrative over the last few days here about, you can just see the subtle, and I won't go political or make statements about the madness of cannabis driving and all that sort of stuff. But you can see, and I'm really concerned about that, and all of our data sets play out in the risk that will present.
Thanks, and it's a really good point that we can never take anything for granted in road safety. The gains we've made have to be maintained, and even that takes considerable energy, and probably particularly, well, in fact, Marcelo, Glenn, to some degree, myself and TAC, how much energy is just put into maintaining the system before you actually start improving it is amazing. So it's actually a really good point, Glenn. Look, I'm going to open it up to the audience now. I've got Michael ready to go. So Michael Newstein, off you go.
Thanks, Michael. Well done. Congratulations. Now, we've had a couple of conversations already about this, and you mentioned Austroads, a little bit of a dig there. So what do you see as the lessons for Austroads? And maybe if you can think about it from the perspectives of the road design fraternity, the road safety crew, and then the registration and licensing. And then perhaps how we can bring those lessons to that broader audience.
Yeah, I don't think it was a dig at Austroads per se, but there's a really strict adherence, a required strict adherence to the current design guidelines. And I understand innovation is really important, and some out-of-the-box solutions that are probably relatively inexpensive but quite medium or high efficacy that apply to a large proportion of crashes could be really useful. So I think that flexibility, but also looking elsewhere. I don't need roundabouts the size of the MCG. I think we all agree on that, it's cost and all of the other sort of stuff and all the utilities you need to move and all that other thing. So it's just about innovation and allowing innovation in the design space, because that can have a really, and almost to be a little bit more aggressive using this data as the basis to say, well, here's the evidence for doing this or doing, X, Y, or Z. And I think that's really important. So I think, not a dig per se, but it's almost like that flexibility and looking beyond the, directly, and it's the strict adherence and the difficulty to it for local government perhaps to implement innovative solutions from a road design point of view, because we point to many. That's the point. And I think from a registration and licensing point of view, I think there's always data collection and whether Austroads plays a role in unifying that. Perhaps that's a bit beyond my ambit and expertise, but yeah, I sort of think that data system side is really important as well, and being able to then provide information potentially at a state or national level on what vehicles are in the fleet and what people are doing is important. So they're probably my key takeouts without putting you in an uncomfortable feet to the fire perspective, if that's okay.
Oh, excellent. Thanks, Michael. Is that going to Renee? Okay, Renee from TAC. Austroads, TAC, excellent.
Libby, I'm interested in your perspective in the post-crash space. You mentioned before road design. Was there anything else that you, made notes, you'd like to see further explored or implemented from this study that could really cut down the severe crashes that AV attends?
Yeah, my mind's going 100 miles an hour, Renee, but I think so I just wonder whether we're limited by the construct of operating models. So I'm talking about an AV operating model or a police operating model, and where we place staff, understanding that serious injury collisions, again, it's across the whole of the community that we serve, and then the trauma of people having to look after people who have MAIS +5 or, those sorts of things. And I just wonder about, one of the things that comes to mind for me is, do we somehow need to expand for AV our response of where our helicopters are based, so our Mica flight paramedics. We don't service, so apologies to anyone who's sort of more Mildura, but I do wonder whether we need someone or another helicopter up there, or, look at the operating model for the future, because at the moment it's serviced by Bendigo. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in that. But I also do think, and police have a model which is about community safety, but I again wonder whether there's the opportunity of that collaboration at council level, where we have things like, so policing and AV, we have municipal emergency management planning committees around fires, floods and those sorts of things. But do we work well enough with councils? I think the highway patrols do in policing, but do AV work well enough, again, about road design and whether our data is captured about, where you were talking about near misses, and I know there's a particular name, but, but for the sake of, and I've always said this, an MAIS 1 could just as easily be a fatality, but for, a couple of seconds. So I think there's some real opportunity in the intelligence and where the risk factors sit in the communities, particularly rural communities.
Thanks, Libby. Oh, we've got people rushing here. Eric, you can go next. Yeah, Carl. Yeah, Carl. Then Eric.
Thanks, Sam. Probably a question more to Mike. My name's Carl Leash. I run Crash Test Centre here in Melbourne, in Campbellfield. So, of course, happy, Mike, to work with you or anybody else when it comes to crash tests, etc. But my question goes to some of my history, which has been developing vehicle safety systems like the stability control and lane departure warnings and the like. I'm really concerned about how we educate the drivers on these systems, how these systems work, how they function, what they see in the car, how they interface with the car. And that, for me, is a big challenge. We develop these systems, but we really don't have a good understanding of how well the people pick those systems up and where the point of training or teaching should occur.
Hi, Carl. Your work at Bosch. I think there's some really interesting tensions between these really advanced safety systems and how drivers respond, and there certainly needs to be a lot more work in that HMI, in the interface, but it's also really interesting to look at prioritisation of warnings and overwhelming the driver. So there's that aspect. And then there's the other aspect, of course, of people modifying their risk. I know my car, I can drive for 30 seconds with my hands off the wheel, before it tells me, just as a test, because I wanted to see what happens. Because it's got lane keep assist, it's a very aggressive vehicle technology. Is that good? Probably not, because the more automation that happens, the more risks people may take, because we've got a tension between people thinking vehicles will protect them from anything and then overlaying this system that automates a lot of behaviours. Our study shows completely the opposite. Vehicles don't protect you. So if we're introducing that risk profile, how we educate people, we expect people to be pilots of an F-18, getting visual warnings here, 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 through the seat, and so on. We need to manage that, and we need to have proper programs to say, this is how your system works, but this is also the limit of your system, and this is how you should behave. Because if you have total reliance on the systems, you will crash and you may die. I think there's a lot of work to do in that space.
Thanks, Michael. Eric.
Thanks, Sam. Could I just congratulate again the TAC on this event and applaud the organisations represented by the people sitting and standing on the stage, because it's a fantastic contribution. I think having that information will be powerful, and we need that sort of deep understanding. But I want to pose a question to Soames, who I know from personal involvement has been involved in trying to improve safety all over the world, and probably with the World Bank, is right up there with TAC and their focus on this, and Soames has done remarkable things in many places. Soames, Australia is sort of a world leader. Victoria, Australia, you've said that, is a world leader in road safety, but we're targeting 0 deaths by 2050, or 50% reduction by 2030 and serious injuries, and then 0 by 2050. That's a really tough ask, and it's a worthy ask. What do we need? What are the critical things we need to focus on to get there? Question without notice.
Oh, thanks, Eric. Well, I do think that, first of all, this study is really relevant to the question. I think that we need to, even for this long-term planning, stick to evidence-based on what's going to work and what's not going to work. And I think that's going to be critical for us in our long-term planning as well as in our immediate actions. And we need that long-term planning if we're going to get to 0 at 2050. To me, there is a deeper structural problem, and that is that I think when we first got these commitments to 0 at 2050 in Australia and New Zealand, there was a lot of backslapping and, oh, that's great, we've got a commitment. And to my mind, we haven't got a commitment at all. There is no political commitment involved in this whatsoever, because there is not one politician alive now who signed up to that, who expects to be in power in 2050. So there is no political commitment, and I think that's the first thing we have to appreciate. There is no substantial political commitment in this. And to my mind, that means what we need to do is do the research to set out the milestones that must be achieved every few years to 2050, not just leave it to 2050. And then we need those milestones to be deliverable and measurable within the lifetime of that parliament and that parliament and that parliament, so we can start to hold them to account for the things they should be delivering if they're serious about us reaching 2050. Now, I think that kind of accountability on our political masters is going to be critical to us achieving it. Otherwise, it will just be delayed and have no political impact on those who don't bother doing it. So I think that's the structural key to it. In terms of what we do and how this study directs us, then first I think, coming back to the speed, I think we over-rely a little bit on enforcement. I think enforcement is an incredibly valuable tool and we need to drive it harder. But I think we need to push the other tools as well. And that means, I think, coming back to what Michael said about, we need the design systems, etc. Part of that needs to be that the designs require that the road infrastructure manages speed. And we have so many opportunities in terms of lane knowing and speed humps and raised intersections and all kinds of things to do that. But we're not actually doing nearly enough of that to manage speeds, especially in low speed environments. And the same of vehicles. There's a lot of technology available to us which could have been in vehicles for 20 years now that is not in vehicles which will manage speeds. And coming back to Michael's point again, we keep shunting everything through the driver. We kind of doing a little bit of intelligent speed adaptation where it just warns the driver. Why is it warning the driver? Why isn't it simply stopping the vehicle from exceeding the speed limit, so that we get rid of these problems? Now, so I think we have a lot of opportunities which are more rigidly system-oriented instead of relying on humans to behave perfectly when we know they don't. And we need to do more and more of those. And I think the other thing that really jumps out about this study is the point Michael's made repeatedly, that the vehicles are not protecting to the level of system we have. We need to get speeds down to where they can, or we need to raise the system to the speeds we've got. We need to do one of those two things, not just sit with this complete mismatch and go, well, that's unfortunate, try and behave better, which is really what we're doing now. So one of those two, in fact, selectively, both of those will be critical to us getting there. But we need to set the milestones that we work towards. And I think just a plug for Austroads, the Austroads project on this, which Eric's chairing the expert group, is, I think, a valuable opportunity for us to push those milestones and start to cement some of the actions we need into place with time locks on them.
Look, the ECIS study has given us a lot of new insights, a lot of new knowledge, I think, and probably affirmed a lot of things that we already knew. And Michael's talked about a lot of things around infrastructure and speed that can be used to sort of manage risk within the system much more effectively. But none of this sort of counts for anything, I suppose, unless we actually translate the findings and things that start happening on the ground. So I guess this is a question for you, Marcelo, and maybe touching a little bit on what you already said about the movement and place framework as a means of embedment. But do you think that will that be enough, I guess, for us to be able to embed this kind of thinking, this safe system-oriented thinking across Victoria's regions, all the way down to the individual traffic engineer and designer who make those decisions that turn out to be so critical?
It's a very good question, and I think it comes down to capability and understanding. I think I was hearing you talk about obviously the commitment to get us there, and I have to put this hat that I kind of from government and thinking about our competing priorities. I look at Libya and I go, the health system, Glenn, with obviously the demands around the police workforce across the state and the different challenges, the response to climate change events, the limited budget, the budget pressures that we have. So ideally and objectively, we talk about a utopical world where perfect would be ideal, and we can get there. And yes, there's countermeasures, and obviously it comes to policy settings. So we got to be realistic about what we can achieve. And I think when I was hearing you talk about is how do we prioritize? What are the things that will make us get there in an effective way? And I really am on board with it. We have targets, right? Like and we are committed. I think when we talk about the partnership, it's on us really to actually get to that 2030. So how are we going to get there? There's investment maps, there's education. But ultimately, part of that education is also getting people like in the regions, to your point, like our traffic engineers, our design teams, our councils on board. And I think we need to obviously, from my point of view, is how do we work with them? How do we make even, I know that you talk about the intersections and I guess the ultimate design settings, the cost of an intersection versus perhaps changing a speed setting. You know, I know which one is cheaper, but also I know which one will probably take a harder community buy-in. So those are the things that, in my mind, we will have to work through in regards to how do we get there. I'm not necessarily sure if I'm answering completely your question. These are the things that I'm like in my mind. How do we get there? And I feel the levers in our hands, our policy, are getting community on board and helping community understand. I guess the change that is required to actually get us there. And for me, when I look at it as an integrated transport outcome, there's multiple messages. We, again, covered mode shift, active transport. You talked about freight. I feel that freight will probably be on board if it becomes reliable. Like for them, it's just more about how do we make sure that we get there and that the supply chain has the time and understands how long, for farmers as well, that the crops are going to get to the port. So those are things that we need to just think system and embed it within the thinking that applies, again, movement and place, network safety plans, integrated transport plans to the regions and those regional plans. And again, I do agree, design will be key. The Austroads piece, I really think I always think we can do more creative stuff. Always on board to look at and think about what else can we be doing. And it's a challenge for our engineers to think about that as well.
Hello, sorry, I've just got one question for Glenn. In 1 minute, Glenn, could you tell me or tell us what you think are the opportunities for sort of use of smart technology or an automated enforcement and how that will help us maintain compliant behaviours?
Yeah, so connectivity of all systems is absolutely vital, and we've seen that, and our ability to link internally in all of our technologies through ANPR, through detection and enforcement is vital. But you know, when you look at Transurban's network, for example, and we've done some work with them and around our ability to hook into those systems, to have a full understanding of what's going on in the network from an enforcement perspective, but from a road, a smooth road journey for the consumer. I think that, we've seen that we see those. And it's a bit anecdotal, but a bit evidence-based around those rises in behaviour, tension, assaults, bad driving when the road system is clogged. I look at our road system, I've spoken to, I used to speak to Carl about this all the time, about sometimes our road system looks like a tip, if I can be frank. And what does that do for guardianship and ownership and commitment of the road user? So we've got a part to play in that in terms of graffiti and all those sorts of things. But basic maintenance in challenging fiscal times, I get it. But that commitment and ownership from the consumer is really important. And then how we use all of those technologies end to end, the vehicle talking to the smart integrated system, the road system talking to the vehicles, talking to LUMs, talking to VMS, our ability to talk to all of those things in a continuum and end-to-end journey map of what the road user experience is that has a safety overlay, that means that we are part of facilitating a really enhanced experience for a road user rather than having to rely on what we do, and we have to do, and we will do, enforcement. But when we have to enforce something, something's gone wrong. We only enforce when someone's done something wrong. So let's move towards integrating our system to make sure that we don't have to do it.
Thank thank you. Can I thank our panel members, Glenn, Soames, Marcelo and Libby, very, very much, and of course Michael. You're probably aware that they've given us their time and at the busiest time of the year, so thank you very, very much for that. And I know probably nearly all the members have meetings that they've got to go to, so we'll let you start moving. And thanks so much for giving up your time today to come and listen. I hope that there was something in it for all of you. Thanks. Thank you.